So, first thing, this is my dog. I promise he loves me, even though he's shivering in the mess right now. His name is Shiloh, and I love him. So, today's video, because I so felt like it, is about ADHD. Now, I'm sure when I say ADHD, you get a very specific image in mind, or at least I do, and most people I know do. They get the image of the hyperactive boy in class who won't ever sit still and is running and running and running and just never ever stops. And while that is true, and that can be a version of ADHD, that was not my experience with it. So I'm going to be talking about the variations of ADHD, what differs it from ADD and why it's no longer a diagnosis, things that I've learned to help, and my story about ADHD. So, it first starts off with ADHD. What is it? Well, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder. And so the first idea when I say the hyper kid in class makes sense. But basically, what it is the little part, like somewhere in the front of my brain, doesn't handle decisions very well. That's the easiest way to put it, and the fastest way I've learned that it works. Is I don't handle decisions well. So, there are three variations of attention deficit. There is attention deficit hyperactive disorder with the strain hyperactive. There's the strain inattentive, and there's the mixed strain. I tend towards the mixed strain, but more towards the inattentive side. This leads into ADD, attention deficit disorder. This is what they used to diagnose more as the inattentive strain of ADHD. And now it's kind of turned to these three variations of ADHD, which, unsurprisingly, has a huge genetic factor and runs rampant on my mother's side of the family, which includes me, my half-brother through my mother, my aunt hasn't officially been diagnosed, but we think she has it, my cousin that I spent a year living with has it, and we suspect that my grandpa had it as well. A lot more has been discovered about ADHD, and there has been an increase in diagnoses with it, but that's because we're becoming more aware of spotting the signals, such as girls. Girls are way less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD because we tend to sit still. And from what I've seen, we tend to have the inattentive strain a little bit more. I've learned that my best friend also seems to have ADHD, and we run in a lot of the same circles like that. That we're both just going and going and going, and it leads to really, really good writing. We both really love to write. This also means that we can never shut up. At least for me. So, what do the three strains separate as? Well, as I described earlier, the hyperactive strain of ADHD, which is the kid that always seems to be running on a motor. This kid just can't, this person really, it can be adults too. And while medication and therapy can help, there are ways to cope with it and there's ways to not cope with it. And everyone finds what works for them. So, the hyperactive strain goes with the face of hyperactive. They're always going, they're always running, they're always moving. Just go, go, go. They never stop, they never sleep. My mom found my brother asleep under the bed once because that's just where he stopped. That's where he fell asleep. And he'd get up and he'd run and he's right back at it. He was always getting in trouble, couldn't sit still in class. Excuse me, I just had lunch. The second strain is the inattentive. And that tends to be what I more lean towards. Because while my body can mostly sit still, and I do have days where I'm very restless and where I have to do things, which is where YouTube feeds very well into this, and I'm excited to give this a chance, that with this, sorry, I lost my train of thought. That's that kind of thing. I forget things so easily. But with the inattentive strain, it's more what's going on in my head all the time, that my brain never shuts up. It leads to very vivid dreams, to me having 17 different conversations at the one time. And I go from step to step to step. So if we're having a conversation and it starts at point A and you want to get to point B, that's great. But I've already gone from point B to point 1 to C, D, E, F, G, and I've also started another conversation in my mind about something that came up with point D. And that is how my mind is all the time. And it doesn't matter. And this is why I thrived in school off of scribbling and coloring in things. Like, I never got a good ability to draw, but man, can I draw a stellar heart. Just the zoop, zoop, that would coat, and you could tell exactly what point I lost interest in classes because of how filled up my papers would get with these doodles. For the most part, I was able to sit still in class, and I think that my classes were set up with the point that I was moving enough that I didn't ever have to feel like I was stuck in a seat. But I did, sorry, this is Lily the cat who lives here at the house I'm sitting at currently, which is where I work, and they're out of town, so I was kind of picking it up. So I didn't ever have a problem sitting still in class, for the most part. That does not mean that I didn't sit still, because I can't sit still, medicated or unmedicated, to save my life. I have a ring that I keep on my pinky finger. I've had it for at least 6 months now, probably closer to 9, that I fiddle with. Mike found it in the front yard. It ended up fitting my pinky, and I fiddle with it constantly. It's just kind of my little, like a nervous habit. I spin it, and I sit there. And I'll just spin it. I'll fiddle with it, I'll pull it off. I'll fiddle with it, I'll put it back on. If I have a hair tie and I have to sit still, I'm tying it and untying it. I don't go to church or any other places where I have to like sit without trying to bring a notebook and a pen so that I can scribble on the paper and that I can take notes. Otherwise, I have no clue what's going on. And I don't do it well. So while I don't sit still very well, but I found my ways to cope with it. And then going into my ADHD story. My mom learned that she had ADHD just about 1.5 years ago, and I only learned about 6 months ago. And while I've been suspicious I remember talking to my doctor at one point, being suspicious of ADD in my teenage years when I was going there for depression. It was never something we pursued until I was preparing for an LDS mission. So I had started to really get suspicious as I was living with my cousins, and the cousin who was related to me through my mom had ADHD, and he had the hyperactive, and I saw a lot of similarities. I also grew up in my childhood with my mom telling me this phrase constantly. Tessa, you're just like your brother, except you're not stubborn and you're not hyperactive. Well, as we were eventually to learn, it's called ADHD. And we've known that both the cousin Mike I live with and my brother Mike, we've known for a long time that they both have ADHD. So it wasn't really a surprise to me when I made a note on my mission papers that I was suspicious that I might have undiagnosed ADHD. Of course, this had them send it back, and they were like, hey, look into this. This is probably like something you should look into. And so I did. I went to a doctor and told her about what was going on, and she did a little test. And she wasn't, they didn't have anyone there licensed to like diagnose it, but I scored it, so they couldn't officially say it. So I had to go to another doctor back home in Utah where I grew up, as I live in Idaho now, for the nannying job, whose house that I'm at. Isn't my life fun? So I ended up going there and getting diagnosed. And they were like, yeah, you have ADHD. Let's get you on some medication. And I started taking medication. And my heavens, what a difference that made. And I know some people don't want to pick the medication route. And whatever people choose is up to them. But for me, it's made a huge difference. My biggest example is how I would clean the house. Is I would start and I'd get a third to a halfway done with one room, And then I'd walk by and I'd get distracted and I'd start cleaning a different part of the house. And I'd go and I'd start cleaning a different part. And then I'd go and clean a different part. And then I'd remember this. Except I hadn't really forgotten it. I just was bored and done. And so then I'd go finish and finish and finish and finish. Which meant that while I was working all day, there weren't really results until the end of the process. So it was frustrating that it became difficult for me to shut my mind down to go to sleep, and that all of a sudden I knew why I was going to get food if I was bored, that I just felt bored all the time because nothing was stimulating me. Nothing was keeping up with my brain. I couldn't keep anything. I couldn't sit still and watch a movie without fiddling or doodling or playing with my hands or tapping my foot. As you can see now, I use my hands a ton, and that's why I'm currently trying to kind of teach myself ASL, because that allows me to use my hands while I'm speaking, which makes me, one, gives me something to do with my hands, and two, allows me another language to communicate, and three, makes me slow down and think about what I'm saying. So I only know a little bit, and I've been using signing time with the 3 children I nanny, and the youngest 2, that I use it with them, and we are able to communicate that way. And it's not the most efficient, but it helps the 2-year-old because he's still kind of lacking the words, and it helps the 4-year-old because she's really excited to say, look, I can sign tree. I can sign tree. And she loves learning it, and so I love encouraging her to do it. But, so I've gone about 3 months now on ADHD medication. And can I just say, the kind that I have been taking was taking 3 times a day. And it's, when you're a forgetful person, it's really hard to remember to do that. Especially that I ended up looking for signs within myself that I would start feeling like my thoughts were racing, that I just, everything was a distraction, and look at this, and look at this, and look at this, and look at this, and oh. If I'm exhausting to talk to, imagine that being your head all the time. Because it's exhausting to be in my head. And that's why I really have liked the medication route. I've also been doing therapy with a counselor that she's helping me and working to figure out where my things are connected. And, this thing that I experienced actually wasn't a panic attack. This is just a surge of emotions. And, it's a positive more than a negative. And all these different things. And research. And it's kind of one of the most shocking things for me is I've been I've been listening to so many TED Talks lately because I don't have to watch them. I can turn them on and do things while I listen to them. I can clean, I can cook, that's pretty much a lot of things, but it's all, you can color, you can sew, there's so many things that you can do and you don't have to watch it, but you can listen to it. So these things but there are no talks on ADHD. I've searched it every way I know how, and there's nothing. There's lots on mental health and depression and autism and all kinds of things, but there's almost nothing on attention deficit, which I thought was really interesting. So I started planning my life as how I would give a TED Talk if I were to give a TED Talk on how I coped with attention deficit hyperactive disorder. So that's where I take a lot of motivation for how I speak. And I've been listening to some really good ones about confident posture. And they're motivating. I highly, highly recommend watching them. They're really, if you watch the ones that are motivating and uplifting or just learning, it makes you excited about the world. And so that's kind of about me and attention deficit disorder. And so I'm going to say some of my top coping strategies for my life and things that have ended up being the most beneficial to me. So the first one is not making yourself sit still. If you know that you have a hard time, whether you have attention deficit or not, it's not fair to yourself and those around you to make yourself sit still. Try to find things that might be quiet or not distracting, but if it helps you to have your foot tapping, if it helps you to doodle on a paper, by all means, if it's not hurting anyone, go ahead and do it. That's how I made it through a lot of my high school classes, and even now I turn on white noise all the time. And as I said, writing, ambient noise, ambient mixer. I think it's ambientmixer.com. It has an app on Android and iOS. I know this because I have an iPad and an Android phone. That for me has been a lifesaver. I am a Ravenclaw, as Harry Potter, unsurprisingly. And I turn on the Ravenclaw common room, and it's so nice when I'm trying to write or do different things to have this just continuation of noise. And I have just fallen in love with it. It's great. And white noise on YouTube too. You can look up fan noises. There's things, it really helps me to sleep with a fan running, and I haven't had one of those since I moved out. So I've started running the hour-long fan white noise YouTube videos. For me personally, the wave and the cricket noises are too unreliable, and I just like the constant that comes from a fan or different things like that. So that's what works for me. But the person that I lived with when I lived here as a nanny, he does really well because he lived in Hawaii and on kind of where there was the ocean. So the sound of the ocean is really comforting to him. So that's one of the things that works for him. So figure out what works for you. And don't be afraid to talk about it. It's one of those things that my mom's like, well, be careful because people don't always have a good idea. But you can't expect mental health and the positivity about it to move forward unless you're willing to talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it. And while there are some stigmas to battle, and it might not be the best thing to bring up on a job interview, and I hate, in America, you have to do this disability form, and one of the options is ADHD. And I always say that I don't have a disability because I truly don't believe that my attention deficit disorder is bad enough or extreme enough that I require it to count as a disability towards work. Well, so maybe it's different for you, but that's for me. And just don't be afraid to talk about it. Explain to coworkers. You can say, sorry, I have attention deficit disorder. It's not an excuse. I love what I see on Pinterest all the time. That saying, I have ADHD isn't an excuse, and don't use it as such. But use it as an explanation. Say, I really did forget. I forget things all the time. I have to be very constant, otherwise nothing stays in my brain. I have to put my keys down in the same place, otherwise I spend an hour in the morning searching for them. And it's a weird battle because I am not a naturally tidy person with how my brain works, unsurprisingly. And I will do videos, I think by this point my medication's starting to wear off. So you can kind of see that I'll do videos on medication and I'll do videos off of medication, and you can see how it has a real effect on me and how it differs. And I would like to kind of record my journey for doing so. That I am going to be in the process of changing my medications up pretty quick. And so with that, I think I would like to take it along, as maybe it'll be out there to help someone, and maybe it'll just be good for me to look at back and remember where I was at different points in my life. So that was today's Tessa Talk, courtesy of I'm Bored. And with my dear dog here. So anyways, signing out.